Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Samir Kapadia. I'm at Cleveland Clinic. I'm chairman of cardiovascular medicine. I'm going to talk to you about neuroprotection in TAVR. Is it an effective strategy or not? I have no financial disclosure, but I am a national co-PI for the Sentinel trial. I was, and I'm a PI for the protected TAVR study. So this is a patient where, as you can see, we are putting the Sentinel device. As the arrow points out, there is a small device coming from the right radial artery, going through a innominate artery there, first in the subclavian, then the innominate. It passes through the innominate artery, and you can see here that it is going down. This is in the ascending aorta. The arch is somewhere there. So the proximal filter is deployed initially right there. So you will see the proximal filter coming out. And this is in real time. So this is a TAVR patient. And you can see that now the filter is being exposed right there. This is in the innominate artery. And then if you go and this catheter will be pulled back and will be flexed in such a way that you will see that we will put the distal filter again live. So this is not a trimmed video. And we are flexing this catheter up and the carotid artery is somewhere there. So there is a small wire. Typically, I use the whisper wire for most of the cases. And if you need more support, then a BHW wire. So it's a 014 wire, and it will go right there as the pointer points out. And as you can see, the wire is going up now. And now the next thing you will see is the distal filter going up. So what you see here is that once the filter is deployed, you will see a proximal filter and a distal filter. The proximal filter is in the carotid artery, and the distal filter is in the left carotid artery, innominate and the left carotid. Now, what is the purpose of this? What is the risk of stroke currently? So if you look at the first generation device, so these are the first generation devices, the risk of stroke was about 5%. Even second generation, most of the time was 5%. Remember, it is not the device, but it is the type of patients. So now the patients are lower and lower risk patients as you move this way. So when you have lower risk patients, the stroke risk is falling down, but still it is 2.5% of stroke. If you look at the TVT registry, again from 2012 to 2017, you see that the stroke rate has been very stable at 2.5% in the TVT registry, thousands of patients. And most of the strokes happen, 68.4% of all the 30-day strokes are within first 3 days of TAVR. So the Neuro-ARC definition of procedural stroke is stroke happening in 72 hours. So that is 70% of the stroke happening in Neuro-ARC. And if you develop a stroke, the chance that you will die, patient will die, is 12.7% versus if at in-hospital mortality, and 16.7% 30-day mortality. Huge. So very high procedural or in-hospital mortality. And even if you develop stroke, you are not going home. So 80% of the people who develop stroke end up in a nursing home. So this is our extended care facility. Very few people, 36% go home, but 66% of the patients are going to a nursing home. Well, if this is the case, is SAVR any better? No, SAVR is not better. So if you look at the major stroke with SAVR, it's 3.9% versus 2.2%. So 2.5% stroke with TAVR is less than that of SAVR. However, it is not 0.1% or less that we see with PCI. So our goal for the stroke for the TAVR should not be as much as SAVR, but should be as much as PCI. So I think we have a possibility to improve our stroke outcomes. So what are the data for the EPD? So that randomized trial, single center trial, and there is TVT registry data. So if you look at the most important randomized trial that was done, and I say most important, but we did it, so that's why sometimes it feels more important. But this is the randomized trial of 363 patients. It's a relatively small trial, and it has a control arm where nothing was done, And then there is an arm where the device was used either with the meaning the MRI outcomes or without MRI outcomes. So if you look at these patients, first of all, the filters, 99% of the filters had some debris, 99%. And 98% with some significant thrombus, tissue foreign material inside of the filter. However, if you look at the primary endpoint, although compared to control, which has the how many new lesion volume was there on the MRI, that was the primary endpoint, was 177 versus 102, but there was a big spread, and therefore the p-values were not significant. So the trial missed the primary endpoint. We published this in JACC 2017. However, if you look at all different ways, so the intention to treat trial, intention for the imputation, because some of the patients could not have the repeat MRI, still, although there was a reduction of about 40%, it was not statistically significant because there was a wide variation. There are 3 separate trials, all randomized, very similar design with the same device, Sentinel device, CleanTAVR, Mistral, and Sentinel. And if you combine all these 3 trials and then look at the primary outcome, change in the mean new lesion formation, we did a patient level analysis. There was clearly a benefit of putting the device. So this was clearly there in that patient population, and this is displayed in another way, and the p-values now are significant, and there was a significant decrease, as you can see there. However, if you look at not in the protected territories, but all territories, still there was no statistical significant difference. That was not the primary endpoint. So the most important part, what we learned, which was not an endpoint, was to just look at stroke. Why do we look at these new lesions and in the protected territories and things like that? Just look at stroke. If you look at stroke, what we found was the control was 9.1%. Of course, all of them had MRI, neurologists are seeing them, so the stroke risk, the ascertainment was very high. So the stroke risk was 9.1 in control, 5.6 in the test arm. And if you look at the percent reduction, it was 66% reduction. And if you look at the first 3 days of stroke, 8.2 versus 3, again, a major difference in the stroke, actual procedural stroke that was seen with Sentinel. With that in mind, the FDA approved the device, and so the device is available. Since the device has been available, there are several single center studies looking at stroke in 72 hours, and they all find very similar numbers. So Sentinel, as I showed you before, there is an Ulm study, there is an Erasmus study, and there's Cedars-Sinai, and very similar results are also there in the Cleveland Clinic. So all of them show a very substantial decrease in the stroke in the propensity matched patients. Dr. Cohen published this or presented this data from the TVT registry, where he took 1,200 patients and divided them with the patients who are EPD versus no EPD. So it is very important to recognize that the EPD was used in very few number of patients compared to the patients who did not have EPD. And the EPD increase has been happening. So if you look at 2018 to 2019, we went from 7% EPD use to 28% of the hospitals. So these are the proportion of the hospitals using EPD. And proportion of the patients is 5 to 13%. So still a small number of patients are having the EPD at the time of TAVR. So the instrumental analysis was one way to analyze this data. The instrument is the EPD, meaning that it is like as if we are doing a randomized trial. If we are using EPD versus not using EPD, what would be the outcomes? And the numbers are statistically not significant, 1.39 versus 1.54. So, and the p-value was 0.41. So although there was a numerical decrease, this was not statistically significant. If you did a propensity weighted analysis, so a different way of analyzing the information, then the numbers were statistically significant. But again, the differences are small, 1.6 versus 1.3. So after first 2 years of approval, the EPD use is minimal. So there's a marked variation between the centers. Generally safe, at least it doesn't look like that there is increased risk of vascular complication, major bleeding, device failure, none of that. But if you look at the primary analysis, the 30-day significant reduction in stroke happened or not, did not happen. And if you extrapolate this data, you would say that you need about 300 patients to prevent one major stroke in this particular device by this data. The reflex study is another device. This is not a Sentinel device. This is a device, the TriGuard device. As you see here, the TriGuard, there are two different versions of TriGuard. And the TriGuard device is a deflector device. So it stays in the ascending aorta and deflects the emboli. And again, small study, control is 63 plus 58, and the TriGuard in 121 patients. And if you look at this safety versus efficacy data, so efficacy cohort was this predefined, safety, as I pointed out before, Dr. Moses presented this data. And what you see here is that the clinical outcomes, actually in the TriGuard, composite outcomes was worse compared to in the control group. And that was also true, although statistically not significant, but numerically it was on the wrong side. And here again, you can see the disabling, non-disabling strokes. So the TriGuard is beige color, blue color. And you see that, although the disabling strokes were less, not statistics, all strokes 6.4 versus 5.3, 8.3 versus 5.3. So, excuse me, a little bit disappointing. And the all-cause mortality was also slightly on a higher side rather than lower, again, statistically not significant. New lesion volume was also statistically not significant, but definitely not in favor of the device. So what is the next step? The next step is to do a proper randomized trial with clinical endpoints. And this is the trial that we are doing. I'm the PI for this trial. This is the Protected TAVR trial. We are doing one-to-one randomization. And there are 100 centers in US, 3,000 planned patients. And when we are 70% enrollment, that is 2,100, we will do an interim analysis. And then, if necessary, we'll increase the size of the sample to almost 6,000 patients. So this study is already ongoing. We are already randomizing in this trial. As I said, one-to-one randomization, simple trial. Primary endpoint is stroke at 72 hours or at discharge. Subjects are followed. If you develop stroke, then you will be followed for 30 days or 90 days, but otherwise you won't be followed long-term. And neurological assessment will be done for all the patients, including neurological exam, modified Rankin score, NIH stroke scale, CAM-ICU score, and MOCA. So what can we conclude? The stroke after TAVR remains to be a clinically relevant problem. I explained to this that it is there in all patients, clearly not very predictable. I didn't go in the data, but it is not a predictable event. And more data are needed to prove the efficacy of EPD in stroke prevention. Safety of Sentinel is fairly proven, but efficacy, you can argue that we do not have a randomized trial, and that's why we are doing the Protected TAVR trial. We have enrolled almost 300 plus patients at 30 plus active sites now. So again, thank you for your attention and happy to take any questions.